You've got questions, we've got answers.
And I think that makes your pathway to university a lot easier.
The brain,
A voice.
Especially the first year if you pick the right subjects in year 11 and 12.
Information.
here, and those signals run down through the spine.
Here
and
in
then
our
exit
studio,
from these
we'll be
spinal
bringing you
nerves,
the
which
answer
is
to these
here,
questions and more.
spinal nerve.
Join us for Infomate. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Infomate. The topic we will be covering today is, as Muslims, how is it being raised in a Western society? This might be a bit of a broad topic, but if you've been raised in any of the Western nations or recently migrated to the West, you'll find that life's not as simple as it seems. When you come from strong religious and cultural backgrounds, it can be hard to understand that your views will need to take into perspective that you're in a Western country, and that you will need to learn how best to assimilate while maintaining your beliefs and culture. It takes walking a fine line while raising your children to allow them the flexibility to be able to see the right and wrong of Western culture and to see the strengths in their own while staying close to the Jamaat. Our children will be exposed to their friends having conjugal relationships outside marriage. Smoking is still prevalent in children in high school. Modest clothing, or the lack of, is more and more prevalent in today's society. It is very important to discuss these issues, find the Islamic perspective on these topics to better arm our children with the knowledge they need to face these issues every day. How do we instill our faith in our religion and find the balance between our own culture and the culture that our children are being raised in? Australia is a multicultural society. We do have to interact with people of other faiths and cultures, and our children are embarrassed to talk to their family or elders about these issues. So to help enlighten our viewers on this topic and to help address the issues and benefits of raising children in a Western society, we are joined here today with Murabbi Wadood Janud Saab and Sadr Majlis Khudam al-Ahmadiyya Australia, Waqas Ahmad.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for joining us in today's show.
Pleasure being here.
Pleasure.
So when we talk about Western society or Western culture or being raised in a Western world, what does that mean for you, Wadood Saab?
Well, Western world doesn't necessarily mean countries which are in the West. If you look at the map or the atlas of the world, Western refers to such first world countries which are, miles and leaps ahead of countries where, education or the lack of education exists, awareness, facilities, things which are just available to you. And just look at Australia or New Zealand, for example. They're not necessarily in the West. However, they're considered as Western societies because they have those values. They have that first world, all those things which a first world country essentially has.
Okay. And so, Saab, do you have anything to add? How would you describe it?
Well, it's a name, isn't it? It's a label. It's just a point of difference in the cultures which you can find in the world these day and age. You've got the Eastern sort of culture or Eastern society, which may include the Muslim culture, Islamic culture, and then you've got the Christianity side of it, which also may fall some in the Eastern culture, but in the West, some practices are different. So I guess in a nutshell, it's a lifestyle. I guess I would put it in a way that the lifestyle being different to what it is you may find in certain other countries. And I agree with Murabbi Saab that it's not about the direction. It's a name given to a culture which is not necessarily the Eastern or the Islamic culture, and it's easy for us to identify the difference in the two.
Okay. So when people say Western world and the benefits of Western world, which is what we've been raised in these countries, so what were some of the benefits you found when you were growing up, Saab?
So I was born in Pakistan and I was 9 years old when we moved to Australia. And, the benefits are definitely there. No one can deny them. And these benefits are having access to basic facilities, such as medicine, education, a good lifestyle, which essentially lacks, in countries that we have come from, for example, Pakistan. Even religious freedom, for example. It's a known fact, for example, that Ahmadis were being persecuted in Pakistan. But the first benefit, I guess, for this migration, for us moving to Australia, was having that freedom to practice this faith that we believe in. So I think that benefit stands above all the rest.
Yeah, and so Sab, did you find some of the similar benefits as you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as an Ahmadi Muslim, especially being born in Pakistan myself, so I was probably, 10, I think, when I came to Australia. That benefit certainly stands out at the most. And I would say along with that, all parents want to bring up their children in an environment which is peaceful, secure, for the, long-term upbringing. So that's what the good thing about the Western culture is. And one of the good things, there are the good things as well. The freedom of religion is definitely a plus. Free education, healthcare, for example, the services, the government and civil services available to you, the wide range of education facilities. So the scope is endless in terms of a career path, a life path in general as an Ahmadi Muslim and as an Australian citizen.
No, so that's excellent. Now, we all know the benefits. We've outlined some of them. They're absolutely amazing for being raised in these countries. Now, as we're raising children of our own, or as we were growing up, there are some drawbacks being Ahmadi Muslims, being raised in these societies that we look at. There's negative influences to these societies as well, which is an unfortunate side effect. It's something that we have to deal with. But so some of these negative influences that we're looking at is as you're growing up, you're going through school. What are some of the negative influences, Maribisab, that you think these children or children growing up today are being exposed to?
So naturally, there is a flip side to the coin. No doubt the benefits are countless of us being here. And that's something that, Sadasab or myself, we've experienced throughout our lives. But unfortunately, with those benefits, there is that flip side of the coin. There are some disadvantages or harms of this society. And as you mentioned, growing up as young children in this society, you can be exposed to effects which which may be against your religion, not necessarily only from a Muslim point of view, but from a cultural point of view as well. So those harms are there in regards to the lack of segregation between two sexes, for example, drugs, alcohol. These things are essentially not only against Islam and even the culture that most of these migrants, like myself and even Saab, we have come from that culture background as well.
Yeah. So when you're raising these kids, they've got these negative influences. What are some of the things that you do to these children, what you can do as parents to these children to help prevent them going through this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick, isn't it? It's the early engagement, I think, is very important as a parent. And I think the first generation always struggles. That's a battle that they have because they don't know themselves really what the culture is all about. And I think, but alhamdulillah, the Jamaat setup is such, it's a very simple solution to all the risks to this good society that they are. So like Rabbi said, where there's good, there's bad everywhere. So to offset that bad, a simple solution which cannot fail is the connection to Jamaat and the connection to the mosque. So I remember growing up as a kid here, spending my school holidays sleeping in this facility or at the mosque, wherever they're available, and utilizing whatever spare time that we had to make sure that, our parents emphasized that, you go to the mosque, you go to the classes there, you play sport at the mosque. Don't worry about playing outside. So what that did, one, it instilled that importance of why we shouldn't be playing with such and such as compared to be playing with somebody at the mosque. That connection is I think is the probably the only thing, if not which is the medicine for this, probably the ill which might be in this society. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, Sadr Saab has definitely shed some light on this because he is a father of two beautiful daughters.
Yeah.
But as someone, I grew up here, and I think one thing that parents, essentially need to understand is to maintain that balance. You cannot lean towards, one side. You cannot be so strict which would in return, kids would rebel in the sense that they would, they may do things behind your back, but at the same time, you cannot be so lenient so that they may indulge, in these ills or harms of living in the society. So maintaining that balance between the two is the key for parents in regards to the upbringing of the children.
Absolutely.
So being raised in this society and as we're growing up, going through the schooling system here, what you guys recommend is as parents or as children growing up through this is from a very early age, get involved in the Jamaat, spend as much of your spare time as possible and assimilating with your own culture, your own faith and religion. Am I correct?
Definitely.
Absolutely. And then, what Rabbi Sab said earlier is that balance, it's important to instill that, education of being connected to Jamaat, but also as a parent, it's important to know your child well and that bond, to have that bond and share those experiences with them growing up. They go through so many various stages. For example, my daughter's 7 at the moment, and I've got a 3-year-old. So, already then you think as a parent, she's going to turn 10, then, she's going to then start high school. So those processes, and I'm fortunate because I've experienced, high school in Australia, so you can already preempt what might or may not happen. So I do have that, I guess, that benefit of, knowing or understanding this culture a little bit better than my parents. However, still that risk remains, so that, as I said, early engagement or staying connected to the child, both on as a parent and a child level, and also as a parent and a member of Jamaat level as well. It's very important. Yeah.
And one thing which Syed also highlighted earlier was connection to Jamaat, but also connection to Khilafat from a very early age. It can be that source of guidance, which youth may lack in or are looking for, especially growing up in these societies. And I remember, again, from my again referring to my personal example, my parents would make sure that, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, we would sit down and write down our emotions and write to the Khalifa and establish that connection, which, again, I sincerely believe, especially living in this society and being part of Jamaat, is very essential from a very young age. And also, just what the Syed said, in regards to his daughter growing up and, he's already thinking about high school. As parents, I believe that if you do not raise your children with certain values and morals, then after a certain age, you should not expect them, or you should not force, you cannot force those morals or values on them. Yeah. So if these children, at a young age, if they have not been taught, if they have not been brought closer to the Jamaat, closer to Khilafat, then after a certain age, you feel as parents that they're going away, that they're going far away from the Jamaat or Khilafat. You cannot force them or expect them when, at a younger age, when you did have that control, when you did hold that sway over those children, as parents, you did not fulfill your responsibility of maintaining that connection with children to the Jamaat.
Okay. So as we're raising our children in this day and age, one of the things that you find as they're growing up is that the first thing they start to watch is TV and in turn learn English very quickly. So how important is it for them to learn their own language, whatever their household speaks, whether Punjabi or Urdu, whatever the case is, maybe so?
I think it's very important, and it's something that Hazur has also emphasized in his classes with children as well. You need to know your roots, you need to know where you came from, you need to know your background. Even if you're born here, your parents may be from another part of the world. And knowing their roots, knowing their struggles, and even knowing their languages is very essential. And even if you look at it from the point of view that knowing an extra language, it's a knowledge. You can never go wrong with that. When you fill out resumes, your employers, they ask you if you know another language, and that's something that works for you. So, knowing another language or knowing language of your parents, it's something that not only Hazur has emphasized upon, I sincerely believe that it's essential, and you can never go wrong with knowing one or more than one languages.
Yeah. So when we talked about some of the disadvantages and drawbacks of the Western worlds, there was a couple of topics that popped straight into my mind. Is stuff like drugs and alcohol, relationships outside marriage. So as children are growing up, especially when they get to that teenage high school area, they're always exposed to their friends or classmates having boyfriends or girlfriends or having relationships outside marriage, or even going out. In Australia, the culture is going out and drinking on the weekend. So our children are being exposed to this as they're growing up. How should they be able to arm themselves? What are some of the boundaries? Where do they need to learn how to draw the line between this and the people they're being raised
Good question, very important. And again, it's that early engagement with your child, that early connection. So that part of life may start in high school, for example. However, in primary school, it starts with birthday parties. It starts with Christmas. It starts with Easter, Halloween. So it's entrenched in this culture, which is what they do. So we respect that. However, we as Ahmadi Muslims do not celebrate those days or those events. So why don't we celebrate those events? It's very important to educate our children from a very young age. As soon as they start speaking, they can understand. Child is very smart, with the technology and everything these days, they're picking up information more than adults, right? So I think it's very important to start educating them at a very early age. And especially we shouldn't dodge difficult questions. For example, my daughter may see someone smoking and, I can quickly just brush her off and say, oh no, that's bad for you. But I can also say to her, why is it bad for you? And what did Hazrat Masih Maud Salam, regard smoking as? Did he like it? Did he not like it? Did he dislike it strongly? So always relate the last message, I feel, back to what Khalifatul Masih said, or what Prophet Muhammad said, or what Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said. So it's very important. And I think, again, back to that, if you start educating your child early and have that bond where you share those experiences and walk with them on that path or that journey hand in hand, the next phase, which is the adolescence, and for the years after that, becomes very easier. And to your question about alcohol and drugs specifically, it's the lifestyle, it's the availability, it's the openness about this culture, which is the risk of this good society. So how do we counter that? It's the education. The why is alcohol forbidden in Islam? The risks of alcohol outweigh the benefits. It's a very common sense approach if you take it with the child. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But we need to pick what suits the child at that point in time. We may need to show them some experiences. Nowadays, there's countless videos available. On YouTube, for example, there's question and answer sessions with Hazur Yanwar on MTA, and what is said and written in the Holy Quran. So those, as well as the common sense approach, the practical approach, or the secular approach, the religious approach is also very, very important. So it's important to follow through that, with them all the way through.
Okay. Now, Murabi Sahib, as children are growing up, they may stray off the path. They may think that sex outside of marriage is okay. What's our standpoint on that? It might be obvious to us, but let's just clarify it for our viewers.
I mean, of course, Islam does not support, condone in any way or form sexual relations, intimate relations outside of marriage. That's full stop. But, children growing up in this society, if they were growing up in Pakistan, that's something that's norm. Outside of religion, that's the norm of that society and culture. That's something that they would see, hear, in schools, colleges, in the playground, and so on and so forth. However, if children are growing up in this society, they're growing up with the norm of having relationships, being with your partner before marriage, having those relationships, those intimate relationships before marriage. So just, going back to what Syed Sahab said, that education, and at the end of the day, parents have to fulfill their responsibility, and that responsibility is the guiding their child. God has said that they're Rabb. God has called, parents Rabb, and that's what we pray for them in the Quran as well. So they do have to fulfill their responsibility as parents in regards to the education and awareness of their children, that even though you are growing up in this society, you see these things which may be normal in this culture, but this is something that we totally believe against. This is something that the Quran admonishes against. So education from an early age, as I've said, not being shy of those questions, We know, for example, in Muslim households or cultures, such questions are usually shrugged under the rug. It's something that you
course.
would not be discussing, with your parents. But parents do have to cross that threshold. They do have to have, that communication. They do have to establish that communication. And if that's done from an early age, then once the child does goes to when the child does go to high school, you would have that norm. You would have that communication there where you could convey, these teachings of Islam, and admonishing your children to stay away from such harms and ills of the society, such as having relationships outside of marriage.
Okay. Now, we were talking about when our children are actually being raised as they're growing up, measures to help prevent all this. But say we've got someone who's a little bit older, he might have strayed off the right path that we've been saying, he might have experienced these things personally, or is just drifted away from our religion, our culture. How can we bring them back? What sort of advice can we, if we know someone like that, what can we do to help them out?
Well, first thing I would say is that we believe in a living God. We believe in a God who answers prayers. Nothing, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings of God be upon him, he said, even if you need to ask for something as small as shoelaces, pray to God. So first step for parents who may have, such children who may have deviated away from the path a bit is prayer. Prayer can, it brought about the greatest revolution 1500 years ago. The Prophet ﷺ has said that the greatest revolution, and the greatest miracle of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, was a revolution 1500 years ago in Arabia, where these barbarics were transformed into godly people. And he said that was out of prayer. So, the first step for parents, for such individuals, is prayer. And second, I would say, and I think this is what Sadr Sahib would also agree upon, is establishing that connection with the Jamaat, especially for youth. If they establish that connection with their fellow brothers at the mosque, if they establish that connection with the Jamaat, that could help them, staying away from those harms and ills in the society, and being together with your fellow brothers who are your fellow, Australians or brothers who are living in that part of the country. So they would understand your mentality, where you're coming from. And thirdly, again, I strongly believe in this, is establishing a connection with Khilafat. I think, perhaps youth growing up in this society, in the Western world, I don't think so. They may they may not recognize, the importance and significance of this. But this is what the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said 1500 years ago, that Khilafat and Imam, it acts as a shield for you, a shield against any harms and ills of a society. If you can truly establish a relationship with Khilafat, with the Imam of the time, with Khilafat of the time, then you can be guided through these, from these ills and evils in this Western culture, in this Western society.
Just
Yes.
a little bit on that. Look, that's essential. There's no two ways about it. The other side of it is, the duty to have is, you may, it's living this society. It's the reality is that, some youth may, fall off the track. It's important to keep that connection with the youth, though, to enable them that becoming that bridge, so they can walk back on it to Jamaat, or to the mosque, or to the Khudam al-Ahmadiyya. It's very important. Now, it's culturally it's difficult, especially if the parents don't have the knowledge or don't have that experience, or haven't experienced. Because normally, as a parent, you would think, my child is great, and alhamdulillah, I'm praying, he's doing all the right things. But, we all have these tests in life. So, firstly, what Rabbi Sahib said is prayer is the most important. There's nothing more important than that. But secondly, if we can maintain that connection with that individual on a personal level, then we'll be able to pass that message, the bond with the Khilafat, coming to the mosque, the bond with Jamaat, the teachings of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the teachings of the Prophet Messiah, and that trust that the person would have in his Qaid Majlis, in his Zaim, in his Nazim, in his Sadr Majlis, for example, in his parent even. That trust is very important. To maintain that trust at all times is very important.
But just Ghazanfar, just one more thing. We've talked about these ills and harms in the Western society. Unfortunately, these ills and harms also exist, in Eastern cultures or even in Muslim countries. And I really, believe in this, and this is something that I would like to emphasize here as well. Last year, I had the opportunity of finally traveling to Pakistan for the first time after moving away from there as a kid. And I had the opportunity of going to the Middle East, to Morocco, and I saw the Muslim world and what it was. And, I've lived in Canada for 7-8 years, and I grew up in Australia. And I finally got the opportunity to compare, the East and the West. And I came to the conclusion that, even though those are Muslim societies, I didn't feel any Islam there. Even though these Western societies are Christian or, not Muslims, but I see more Islam, more good in these people than I saw over there.
Wow.
And this is what, the great poet of India, Iqbal, this is, what he said in his poetry as well, that I went to the West, I saw many Muslims, but apologies. He said, I went to the West and I saw Islam, but I didn't see Muslims. And he said, I came to the East, I saw Muslims, but I didn't see Islam.
Wow, that's amazing. So what we've gathered here from what we've discussed today, basically, is that as you're raising your children, or as kids who are our viewers are watching this and are growing through this themselves, is to try and maintain that connection with, number one, your parents, and number one as well is your Jamaat. Making sure you have those channels, those avenues open to maintain those beliefs that you have in yourself and in your culture and your faith. Now, one thing that I did want to stress is something that you mentioned, Saab, is that if they do stray, there's always that bridge to make sure you try and keep that communication open to help show them the path back. That's very important. I love that little point that, there's always a chance at redemption. There's always something to come back to. And that's amazing. That's the message I think we should definitely give to everyone.
Muhammad, peace be upon him, he has said, it's a hadith, and, God says that even if man comes to me with sins equivalent of this planet Earth, I will return towards them with greater compassion and forgiveness. So, with such beliefs, you should never, if unfortunately if a youth has gone astray, you should never lose hope. There's always a chance for redemption. There's always a way back.
Anybody for that matter. It could be at different stages of life, different circumstances, or change in circumstances, environment, impact individuals differently. And that communication is very open and clear communication, and that trust, in one another. I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, the Prophet ﷺ said that, if I find a drunk person, sitting in the gutter on the street, I would pick him up, I would take him home, I would clean him up, I would feed him. And those are the teachings of the Prophet Messiah, the Imam of the age.
So, well, thank you very much for joining us today. We've seemed to cover a lot of these issues that I hope educate our young viewers on some of the things to expect as they're growing up, some of the things they might have already gone through, and parents as well, for the young children they might have growing up. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
The benefits of being raised in the Western world are many. There is free education, the right to vote, and have your say in the way your country is governed. The right and freedom to practice any religion without the fear of persecution. There are also issues that are widely accepted by Western culture that conflict with our religion and our culture. These are issues that our children growing up and the young adults today are faced with. Now, they should be armed with the knowledge to be able to deal and handle these topics. I hope we have been able to provide you some insight and some clarity on the issues that children growing up with are facing today in these Western cultures, and I hope that the generations that are coming up are able to maintain their faith and cultural identity. Thanks very much for watching. We look forward to bringing you another episode of Infomate from MTE International Australia Studios. Jazakumullah and Khudafis.